Good evening and welcome to another episode of the Bookum Nook Show. My name is Kyle Colley, and this is a special episode of Creators Talk Podcast, a podcast for book conversation with your favorite bookish content creators. This episode is brought to you by Bookum, the book community's new and best way to host dynamic online book clubs. Download the app and start your book club today at www.bookumapp.com. My guest today is the insightful Ezra McCoy. Ezra is a writer and the mind behind the Ezra Indited blog. With his masterful penmanship, he captured the voice of culture, art, books, TV, fashion with honesty and clarity. He's a sports fan, he's a hip hop head, he's thought-provoking, and he's a passionate reader. Ezra, welcome to the Creators Talk Podcast.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I appreciate the introduction. Very kind of you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I read a lot of your threads and all that, so it's been good to just connect with you.
Yeah, no doubt. Thank you.
Before we get into the conversation, I love to talk a little bit of basketball, just like some playoff talk.
Yeah,
I know
let's
you're
do
a
it.
fan, so who do you got in the finals, and who do you got winning it all this year?
You want me to upset some people? Okay. I've got the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the Boston Celtics, and I got Wolves in 6.
Goodness gracious, I wouldn't have believed you. If you said that before last night, I would have said Denver, but. After last night, the Wolves they clamped us down nice. So now I'm like, I'm scared.
Let me tell you something. I would pull up the Threads post where I said the Wolves can beat anybody this year in December. Okay, so it's not a bandwagon thing. I know they didn't look amazing in the regular season, but you also got to think. There was a 3-way tie for first place going into the very last game of the season. It was a very tough Western Conference. But the thing that did it for me when I was trying to figure out why these guys were probably primed to make a good run is, first of all, they've got the right roster construction. But beyond that, I saw their mental makeup. So everybody, you see Ant-Man and you see this guy's full of confidence. But I saw their mental makeup against Boston when they won that overtime game against Boston. I was like, no, these guys are legit. I think that was in January, maybe January 24th or something like that. So after that, I was like, no, I'm not worried. They match up well with anyone. But that's not book talk, but
yeah,
there's
I
some
know.
good
I was
basketball
gonna
books
say
out in the last 12 months. So
it's good to talk a little basketball before we begin. Us Nuggets fans, we seen the Timberwolves coming, but that's besides the point. Let's start with your writing journey. When did you first start taking writing serious and sharing your writing with the world?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. It's really interesting because I started creative writing in school. So I think a lot of people be like, oh, so did I. But there was a part of it where it was kind of beyond the assignments and more into like even contests or short stories and essays. I even wrote a little bit for like school papers. But as the older I gotten, the more I was like, I wanted to do something serious in this world. So I wanted to go into business or do something that would land me on the cover of a magazine or,
Right.
something in that nature, right? And so there was a conscious effort to move away from spending my time making things and trying to make money, right? Uh, as I had gotten to a place where I had started doing a little bit of the making money part while I was running different businesses. Um, what I started seeing is that, hey, look, I was still writing, and so there was something there, and I was still telling a story, whether that's like, like these proposals, or whether it's like copy and content for a client or what have you. But I found it wasn't really satisfying because it's not really what I wanted to do. But in 2020, a lot of things shifted for me personally, as well as like the world changed for all of us.
Yeah.
And I ended up at a crossroads where I had an option to go back and start another company, which I was not very passionate about. But then I also sat on it and thought, I was like, hey, if you want to be an artist, if you want to be a writer, now's the time to do it. Because I would never have, my reasoning was I would never be in a situation again to where, I'm almost like at a rock bottom moment, from a rock bottom place. And so if I didn't decide now, like once things start turning around and and getting in a better situation, then it would be even more difficult to do it. So um,
Yeah.
that's kind of an origin story
It's
of
it's interesting you say it like that too, because so often it's also the writer who becomes the person that's able to create businesses and create copy and sell. If you think
yeah.
about it, even from like George Lucas, he's a writer,
Mhm.
right? He's a filmmaker, but
Yep.
he has to create Star Wars. So it is interesting what the writer can do in this society. And kind of speaking of that is like in a world full of tweets and captions, what makes long like form content enticing to you, especially with blog writing?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it seems that everybody wants to hear from uh, the people that they follow more often, more frequently. And um, I think sometimes, at least for me, long form content takes quite a bit more time. And so one of the things that I think is really important to me is, if I'm being honest, a healthy ego, right? So it's at my core just kind of believing that and not unique to me, but like everyone else, like have something to offer this world, right? And I believe that the world also has a lot to offer me. So the thing is, I want to make sure that I'm creating things that help future generations the way that, say, James Baldwin helps me with, like, for instance, the evidence of things not seen, right? As I am looking at um, how James Baldwin is just like his analysis of not just the Atlanta child murders, but the particular uh, economic and political environment that would allow this to exist or to happen, right? Or like Du Bois, as I go to Du Bois, who had, what, 60, 70-year publishing things,
Yeah.
stuff like that. It's like, okay, well, I don't, I have a particular view that artists are not necessarily um, beginning or ending a conversation as much as they are extending a conversation and opening more people and inviting more people to the conversation. And so with that, that's a part of why I'm like, hey, let me think, let me be more thoughtful about creating long form art because I think it's probably I have a concern with what happens with short form content that we're all creating, and what's going to happen to it, and if everything's on like a hard drive or it's some on the some data center, we call it a cloud, but it's stored, so it's somewhere. Like I'm concerned with what happens to all of those things, how we're going to be able to sort through all of these things, how we're going to be able to organize and then retrieve the important ideas and artifacts that we're leaving behind for future generations. And so, um, for me, that's part of the reason why I'm, actively working towards more book length projects and other forms that might have longer staying power than, say, a Threads post.
No, you hit a great point, and it was well said, especially when you're talking about Baldwin and W. Du Bois and some of their concepts that you only can really get it from long form content, whether it's Du Bois really breaking down this idea of double consciousness. Like you don't get
Mm-hmm.
that from just let me tweet this out type of points. Like that is hard fought through the writing process. And
Yeah.
speaking of that, like, can you discuss your creative process when it comes to composing long form or just newsletters in general?
Yeah, it's very messy. I would say the idea is that I write something, and whenever it comes to me, and maybe it's a notes app. Preferably, it's not. I like to write it down on paper if possible. So I have little notebooks, and there are some of them are like categorized in a particular way, but most of them are not. It's just I need something to write on, and I don't want to lose what I've written. Once I begin creating something that feels like it is a project of some sort, then I put it in a file and I just work through it. It's not like I don't really, I don't really perceive it to be anything that's elegant at all or even scientific. I don't know what happens. My one of my favorite books about making things, just in general over the last year or two, was Carl Phillips' My Trade is Mystery. And there's something there that I think like makes sense to me, right? It's like I don't know what happens. Like I'm currently I'm working on like some a series of small books that I'm just gonna create and give out freely to folks who just come to the website and give me their email address, right? Um, just to kind of build an audience and also to build up a creative stamina for longer projects. Well, I don't really know if those books are writing, or if I'm writing those books, or if they're writing me. To be honest with you. So that's probably like a long form or an overarching, kind of idea of like the creative process. But it's interesting you asked about um, the newsletter, because I've been on a bit of hiatus because I had to press pause. I'm looking at everything, all these different things that are going on in the world, that are going on in my world, and I'm like, hey, it's really important for me to not do this just to be in the newsletter game. I don't have any monetization turned on, anything like that. So I'm like, okay, well, what, to make it short, what's the point? And so I've been really, struggling through that. And I think I've come up with something that makes sense to me as far as what I can put out, and then also what I can sustain, but then also to make it surrounding certain things that I think are important conversations to have and to continue to have. And so the newsletter itself is turning into what I would call a recommendation essay. And so I have, whether it's books, art, TV, film, photography, these different things that I'm recommending, art articles, other Substacks, newsletters and stuff like that, where I'm recommending these things, but they're coalesced around like one big idea, or one central idea, central message. And then in addition to that, one or two essays a month with one or two reviews of things per month.
No, you brought up a good point about newsletters, because the world doesn't necessarily need another world newsletter. So when you do bring a newsletter, it's that value that comes with it. Like, I think we think about that a lot too from Bookum. It's like, how do we give the best amount of value in this one newsletter? If they only open this newsletter, how much value can we put into this? So I even like what you're talking about when you're like, hey, I'll have a book I'll drop with the newsletter. I mean, newsletter, just by you putting your email on it. Like, what type of style are those books going to be?
Yeah, so it's somewhat experimental. And so the first one I'm working on is the title is just sales jobs, excuse me. And it's loosely, there are some autobiographical elements, but it's in no way like auto fiction or anything like that. But I'm just taking some like pieces of jobs that I've had before, and taking those and turning those into flash fiction, and then so it's 5 or 6 pieces of flash fiction, and then one proper length short story.
Oh, cool.
And so um, just just experimented with some things. And to me, that was, as I was brainstorming, like what would be a good way to kind of put this out. I'm like, well, it's just I could just directly just give it to people,
Right.
and if they're interested, they could download it and put it on their e-reader or whatever the situation is.
Yeah. Yep. Direct to consumer, right? Direct to your target audience.
Yeah.
Gordon Parks, he talks about using the camera as a weapon. I'm curious to hear how you use the pen as your choice of weapon.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question for a couple reasons. Um, I've kind of gone back and forth as far as my understanding or my belief in the pen as a weapon, or as any particular thing that we use to make art to be a weapon. Um, but I really do like, and I have meditated on that quote from Gordon Parks. He says, "I picked up a camera because it was my choice of weapons
Yep.
against what I hated most about the universe: racism, intolerance, and poverty." And so I do think there's something to that. So, but I'm thinking more as a tool, right? As a tool that works for me and on me, right? And so Karl Marx once said, "Philosophers seek to interpret the world, but the point is to change it." You know, and so, and I think that's true of artists too. And so, because what is a true artist if not a philosopher? And so, if we're not digging deep into ourselves and doing what James Baldwin says, which is to make the world a more human dwelling place, then what is the point?
Yeah, I know. I think that's well said, and I agree with you. Like you use the pen, or as he said, as the camera as a choice of weapon, but in a lot of ways, it is a way to liberate and to talk about it. I know you talk a lot about how you use the pen yourself as liberalization. How do you believe, like, kind of how books and pop culture intersect with your choice of liberating through writing?
Yeah, so um, I think there's an aspect that maybe, if I'm really being honest, I don't know how much I believe in in what maybe some folks call self liberation, if it's not connected to the liberation of all. So I think of certain practices, or even like even financial situations, where you have like a little bit more wiggle room, right? And so it might feel a little bit more free than others. But let's just give an example, something like freedom of speech, or the right to assemble, certain First Amendment rights and principles. I think we see what's going in the world right now, that there are certain things that you can do that make that you're like, okay, this is positive, like that we have these positive freedoms, and then there are certain things that you can do that kind of show you the limits of such. And so when I'm thinking about liberation in those terms, I don't know that I would say that I don't think we can say anyone is free, unless we're all free. Because if not, we always have to ask freedom for whom and from, and to do what or from what, those types of things. Where I think books and pop culture come in is when we truly engage thoughtfully in these things. I think it creates a scenario in which we have mirrors, right? So if I'm reading, a brilliant piece of fiction, like I was just going to reapproach Assembly by Natasha Brown, because she's got a new book coming out, I think next year. And so as I'm looking through that, and the main character has a pretty decent job, is I'm trying to think how to dig into it without giving the plot away, just because I really wish people would read this book, where you're dealing with yourself and you're like, hey, look, what sense is it for me to be comfortable while the world burns, right? And so that's kind of what what I see as the central tension. And what the main character decides is that the things that I'm doing, I will do these for the people who are coming after me. But she does so in a very particular way. And so that's the kind of thing where I'm looking at that and I'm like, these are the types of questions that I have, right? And this is what I mean by, like, artists, can, are, true philosophers as well, because what we're trying to figure out is, how to live better, and how to relate better to one another, how to understand ourselves better, how to be in this world. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like the way how you frame that. So in doing that, like, how do you better understand yourself in the context of culture, society, history? Like, how do you understand that better?
Yeah. So I think that's a great question, because for me, I think it's important that we view ourselves as agents of history, right? So I think it's important that we don't just see things things just happening around us and being dictated to us by some, you know, nameless, faceless, whether you want to call it the government, corporations, the state, that we have no agency in that. I think it's important for us to see ourselves, and this is part of the reason why, like, I think, it's important to read history. It's important to read, different essays as well as fiction, and to engage in different types of art. I was in Washington, D.C. last year, and for the first time, I was able to visit the National Portrait Gallery. And it's really incredible, the work that's there. It's like from the old European masters, to some more contemporary stuff. Like I saw Philippe Gustave, as well as like Pablo Picasso,
Other paintings, yep.
Yeah, as well as several others, in between. And I think when you start seeing like how we were, when you start engaging how we were, I think we can start to see how we are and find the answers to how we want to be.
Yeah, I think if you honestly, when you don't study history, I think it gives you such a like distorted reality, like because you don't see how things have got to this point, right? So you think what you see is all there is, right? But you can learn. That's why it's either books. You kind of, even if it's like people that have passed away, it's like you read books and make friends with the imminent dead, right? You go and learn about Baldwin and what he's built. You go learn about. To your point, I think you said, yeah, W. Du Bois you mentioned earlier. You go and learn about these people so you can see how they dealt with the world and how they experienced it. And you learn a lot from that. But in doing so, for the people that kind of just do consume a lot of like more media of modern day, like how do you personally balance the consuming media side versus like creating your own art and self-expression through content?
Well, I'm sure you heard there was a very huge rap battle that just happened. And for an audience that may be not familiar, or for the uninitiated, two of the bigger rap artists, probably two of the biggest rap artists of the last decade or 15 years or so, engaging in the rap battle tradition. And so in that case, it's been mostly consumption and little reflection, and creation. But like I said, the piece is coming out tomorrow. There's some reflection there. I don't know that I am a person. I have ADHD, and so it's difficult for me to stay on like a very strict regiment or what have you. And so what I try to do is create kind of loose rules for myself. It's like, hey, I spend time doing this, then I spend time doing that, but nothing that's like super rigid. And so whenever Kendrick Lamar decides to release a freaking a diss song before I've had finished my coffee, then I'm like, I want to feel, I don't want to feel bad about myself for indulging.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I don't know how well that I did answering that question, but I think, I do think for me, I won't say, I can't speak for other people, but for me, it's important to have some type of regular practice, writing, even if other people don't see like a lot of, I write so much that I never share. Right. And so some of my close friends, they'll see stuff and they'll be like, you never put that out. I'm like, no, so, but, that's because I'm, waking up and, 5:30, stretch a little bit and then sit down and write.
Yeah. I mean, I think that is the role of the artist. Like the artist doesn't always have to share their art because they have to make things that are personal. That way they can give it to the world and the world can feel it from the way they've put it out. But sometimes I'm sure the best music that we've never heard, I mean, some of the best music that's ever been made has never been heard by the majority of us, right?
Yeah.
And then into the Kendrick and Drake thing, it's just like, what a time to be alive. Like you see the
What
two,
a time.
you know, so you see
Yeah.
the two best artists at other generation going at it. Like it's hard not to pay attention and watch and see all the moves and everything, especially being on social.
Okay, Kyle, to be honest, Kyle,
Yeah, go ahead.
going into this thing, were you on Team Kendrick or Team Drake?
I've always been a Kendrick fan, so
Okay, hey, I think we should hang out next time I'm back home in Denver.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, I'm with it. I think I mean because I'd have nothing against Drake actually. It's just more so I've always just enjoyed Kendrick's music more, if
Yeah.
anything. But speaking of art and music and all that, like
Yeah.
what pieces of art have really challenged your worldview in the last 2 or so years?
Okay. Um, I can't point to one like piece of visual art. For instance, um, I'll try to answer it this way. There have been people who I've there's one thing I've read, and then there are several people that I've kind of appreciated their art, and they've helped kind of shape. So um, Jesse McCarthy has got this collection of essays called "Who Will Pay Reparations on My Soul." It is an incredible work of literary and just art criticism, right? He covers so much ground, traverses so many different disciplines in within the criticism. And it's something where I was just like, wow, this is written for a reader like myself, you know? And so it's challenging in a way where not just that there are moments where it's like dense and you have to chew on it, but there are things that are thought provoking that are like, okay, when next time I'm in a gallery show, next time I'm at an opening or a museum, like I want to know if I can, if I see it this way,
Mm.
So there's that. But then there's also like on the everyday tip, um, there's a buddy of mine named Reggie. He's based out of Atlanta as well, and he goes by Nobody Famous on social media.
Okay.
So I've seen this. I've seen Reggie put out process, like he's a 3D amongst many things. He's a 3D animator, and so he's shown how he's grown in the last few years to now to be like this masterful 3D animator. And so he puts out little pieces of work. He makes his own. He produces his own music,
Okay.
and so he puts that in the background. It's super dope. It's really really dope. And so how that it's kind of challenged me is to look at that's part of the reason why I needed to do the newsletters, because I'm like, well, how is he able to continue to do the work that he's doing while sharing it with other people so they can come along with the journey? And so that's kind of been one of the ways that's been challenged. So that's kind of how I've been looking at it. It's like more so how a particular artist is facing the world at this point in time in history.
No, it makes sense. I want to shift a little bit more into pop culture, just like
Yeah.
what is in your opinion, like just watching pop culture and I guess arts and all these different things, like what does pop culture kind of teach us about ourselves as well?
Man, that's mm, uh in some ways maybe it's not teaching us much, because if you look at the way that things are evolving, or maybe even some people might say, if you look at the decadence, in some ways you can see that a lot of folks are not learning lessons that we need to learn. Um, but then I think in other ways that if you can step outside of the like the consumer role that we're expected to play, and you really engage deeply, thoughtfully, I think that it can provide an opportunity, like any aspects of pop culture can provide an opportunity for you to really wrestle with, kind of from like a psychoanalytic perspective, like who you are and where you are in this world, and how you can, getting back to that quote earlier, how you can contribute to changing it, because a lot of folks have a lot of different critiques of society and government and these different things, right? And so I think most people you meet would not say that things are perfect. Maybe even some people might not even say things are going well, right? But if that's the case, then like, how is that coming out in the culture? And then once you see that in the culture, it's like, okay, how can you begin to kind of shift it and change it? Which I think is the true significance of this Kendrick Lamar and Drake. Because basically, Kendrick Lamar's thesis, I'm not saying he's right or wrong, just this is my understanding of the thesis of his argument in this rap battle, is that, hey, look, we're almost 40 years old, and you're not making music that represents the things that we want to see in this culture as like, almost 40-year-old Black men, And so then he decides, well, you're the number one guy, so I got to get you out the paint. That's my understanding of, what happens there. But then when you get a piece like The Heart Part 6 from Drake, and you hear like an intentional misreading of Mother I Sober, by Kendrick Lamar, which was on Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, which I think is amongst all the praise that I can bestow upon this album. I think above all, it's a literary masterpiece, right? So when you're looking at this and he's talking about sexual abuse, that's kind of the history of sexual abuse in his family, and somebody his same age poking fun at that on the other hand, I think that's kind of where you start to take the threads and the strands of like pop culture and to say, well, hey, what are we doing? Is this something that, is this the person I want to be? Is this the society that I want to live in, that will accept and accept the environment that would allow this to be a funny or a cool thing? And I was happy to see that a lot of people said, no, man, that's not good. That's not cool.
Yeah, I was honestly surprised too. Just being how popular Drake is, you would think that more people would be on the side of just like how he kind of makes music. But I think you saw a lot of people kind of push back on it, which kind of just goes to, that's why I kind of want to talk to you. It makes a lot of sense when it comes to culture and pop culture, where you see even things like Cat Williams kind of pushing back on truth this year. I'm not saying he was right on everything he's saying, but I think a lot of people want to be truth tellers and want to engage with art in a different way. Like when it comes to books, like how have you been able to engage with the words on pages it's themselves? Like, do you, outside of just the book itself, like when you go out in the world, how do you engage with the book that you've read?
So practically, in a practical sense, like I'm writing in the margins, I don't watch a whole lot of TV, right? But when I'm doing, I'm just simply trying to make connections. So when I'm reading, it's like, okay, what did I just read? What does this mean? What am I trying to do? Is there anything I can do with this here? Like, does this apply to my life at all? And, right now, is this something I need to put on the shelf for maybe a future, date? Is that what you mean? Is that a good answer?
Yeah, more or less. It's just in general how you engage with the text that you read. Yep. And then as we keep going through the mediums of pop culture, like how do you engage with film and art as well?
Yeah. So probably, I'm kind of boring in that perspective. Like, I don't know if it's, kind of growing up the way I did, kind of a workman like ethic about just like, hey, look, I need to just work through these ideas and or before I work through them, just allow them to kind of wash over me and then reflect on them and then, kind of work through in almost a dialectical manner, Um, But that's pretty much, the same there, really, as I come to think about it. You know, it's very much so like a very nerdy type of thing. So probably just, I mean, self-reflection and then, taking some type of creative action.
No, that's good. And as we kind of wrap up in the culture area, just like what are some pieces of art or culture that have kind of shaped your worldview and that you've engaged with as well?
Um, I will say, if collectively, like you mentioned Gordon Parks earlier, and Gordon Parks, photography has been something that's like, kind of been very, because I think that was probably um, the only time, the first and, time and the only person for a long while that I knew that was a Black photographer, you know. And so there had a lot to do with it. Um, I think when we get into, I already said Du Bois, so I should say also Ralph Ellison. I should also say Zora Neale Hurston, Toni Morrison. You know, I say like these are folks who certainly kind of shaped my worldview. Um, James Allen McPherson, big time. You know, he's got um, this essay called Junior and John Doe. It's a really interesting essay. I don't know why. Like that's something that whenever I talk to people about it, they're like, "No, I don't know who James Allen McPherson is," or they haven't read the essay. Which is it's really interesting to me as a Black person, because he's talking about like basically capitalist decay and how we're there is an element of like the I don't know if you want to call it the Black bourgeoisie or have you, right? That's taking notes from white folks trying to create a I don't know, some type of like utopian situation where it's like, okay, we made it, we're comfortable, so on and so forth. But he posits that he's saying that essentially like we're taking notes from the 30, 40 years ago.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Like the idea is that and there's this book called How to Go Mad Without Losing Your Mind, and the author in it says that when you're in the pit, sometimes the pit has the seeds, and so I think it's interesting because the idea is not that we kind of replicate these systems of domination and harm and oppression. It's that in the pit, we find the seeds to a new world. I think that's a type of Afrofuturism. That's the type of, liberation that, can come from looking at it that way. Right.
Perfect. And as we get into the close, I just want to ask a couple rapid fire questions.
Yeah.
What's the importance? What's an important book that no one is reading? I mean, what's an important book that no one's really talking about that people should read?
I'll go back to that. How to Go Mad Without Losing Your Mind. Yeah. Yeah.
And then
That's
also, what's an important piece of television or movie or documentary that no one's talking about that that's worth watching?
I don't know if anybody's talking about this, but I'll say Severance. I think it's won some awards, but
Okay,
I think that's a great show. That's a
bet.
great show on Apple TV Plus. Yeah.
All right. Any documentary?
Documentary. It's been a minute since I've really saw a documentary that's not in my socks off. Um, the the I can't remember the director, but the Basquiat,
Okay,
I want to call it the original Basquiat documentary because it's closer to a better story than the one that the Warhol Foundation is telling.
all right. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah,
What about a living artist or creator that you'd like to have dinner with?
it's gonna be either Devin Allen or Mitchell S. Jackson.
Okay. And then a dead artist or creator that you would have loved to have dinner with.
Gotta be Ralph Ellison.
All right, cool. And these last questions, they don't have to be short form, but this is the way I always end our podcast. What would you like to see more of in the book world?
Uh, I would like to see people. I would just like to see more people like what they like because they like it. Right. Worry less about other folks, how they might judge. Because if we're really engaging, different works of art in our culture, even some of the uglier things, even some of the, whether things that are not as well executed, um, I think that that's a way. Like, there's a way that, let's just talk books, right? There's a way that a book is written, and you could say, hey, look, I read it from cover to cover, and now it's finished. And, this is the author's intent. And, they started the conversation and they ended the conversation. But then there's another way you can read a book where you can say the author's extended the conversation, right? Going back to kind of what we talked about in the beginning, right? And I've been invited into the conversation to extend it even further. And to me, that's more of a way that we can see cultural shiftings rather than like, hey, I want to make sure Kyle doesn't think I'm a crappy person, so I'm going to stay away from this book or that book. I think that's where you get to the importance of like going from Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, right, where you can get to James by Percival Everett, right? It's
Sure.
because you don't shut down the conversation, and so read things, enjoy, like the things you like because you like them, but extend the conversation.
No, that's very well said. And then on the other side of that, what is a book? I mean, what's something you'd like to see less of in the book world?
Um, so there are certain arguments and things that I've just kind of started muting because now that I have muting capability on threads, right? Where it's like some, people are like, um, should you rate a book poorly because you didn't like the main character or something like that? I'm like, that's up to you. I don't really care. I don't want to. I don't want to see that conversation. So I muted it. I think that's the other thing, that there are some ways that we've been able to gain a little bit more control over, what's served to us on the algorithms, and so, I would like other people to kind of do the same, because the more that you talk about, oh, this is problematic, this is an issue, this and any other, the more life you give it. But if we just collectively like ignore things, especially things that are, particularly harmful, we might have to contend with those. But the things that we can, just like, hey, look, we're not going to give this person or this idea any attention. Just, block, move on, mute,
Right.
whatever your situation is. But never underestimate voicing something, in the direction of something that you don't want gives it more life.
No, that's very well said. Ezra, thank you. It's been a pleasure for having you on this podcast. Thank you for just spilling your brain and talking about creative stuff and the culture and everything. Let us know where we can find you or anything that we should support that's coming up in your life.
Yeah, thank you. So on Instagram and Threads, I'm at Ezra Indited with no C. So EzraIndited. And then also you can find my newsletter at ezramccoy.substack.com. And I also want to say a special thank you to you, Kyle, for reaching out to me. I've been seeing what y'all are doing with Bookum. I think it's wonderful, and I wish you much success. Thank you so much for having me here.
Yes, appreciate you, man. Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.